Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Thursday, October 10th, and as we continue through Baylor's football bye week, their off week, the first of the season, Grace and I are going to go through our opinions on just why Baylor could rebound from this 2-4 start, win 4 or possibly more games, and get to a bowl. So we're not projecting this, we're not predicting it. We're just saying these are the things that have to change that could potentially align for Baylor in the second half of the season to get the postseason. Kind of the bar, it's been the bar all season long, and why that should happen or potentially happen. In the first 6 games, Baylor has played 3 road games: Utah, Colorado, Iowa State. Baylor will face Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Houston on the road. They face ranked teams in the first half of the schedule. There are no ranked teams right now in the second half of the schedule. Has played more defensive-minded teams in the first half, less defensive-minded teams in the second half. There are some like Houston that kind of play into that. And I'm not really ready to say I'm optimistic by any means, but if you look at the schedule and the way this sets up, we've talked about it really, the last few weeks, that second half of the schedule just looks much more favorable for Baylor and potentially meeting their goals for this season.
It absolutely does. It's a case of, the beginning of the season, the schedule being a lot harder than most people anticipated. And I know that a lot of people are making the argument, well, they still have to win these games, or it doesn't matter, you still got to win these games. And that's great. But, and I think a lot of people are also kind of taking this as, when the wins happen matter. Maybe to some extent, but I think in general, like, getting to 6 wins is getting to 6 wins. Yeah. There is no, we can argue, in circles about it, but if you win 6 games, you win 6 games, you go to a bowl game. And so I think that's important to remember. These things happen sometimes. There have been many teams that have started 2-4 and then turned it around with a more favorable schedule and ended up making a bowl game. So I think it is important to remember that, despite the fact that I know a lot of people are in panic mode right now, for reasons that I understand. I definitely do. But I do think it's a situation where if Baylor can really turn some things around during the bye week, they'll give themselves a chance to go 4-2 at the finish. Not predicting it, but they will give themselves a chance with these favorable matchups.
Yeah. So let me ask you this before we get into our kind of our outlook for the second half and what Baylor needs to do. Did you believe going into this season that Baylor is a top 25 team?
No.
Okay. So regardless of where these teams are, games are played, when they fall on the schedule, would you say that Baylor should have beaten, coming in this season, 3 top 16 teams in BYU, Utah, and Iowa State? 2 of those on the road.
Definitely not.
Okay, so I'm not creating an excuse, but regardless, like you just mentioned, of when these games are played, you're facing challenging teams. The disappointment is in those games when you have leads and they vanish. You can't finish a rally like BYU. Maybe you didn't start your best option at quarterback, which is kind of proven to be true early in the season against Utah, which is probably the only thing that I can really point to and say, okay, that's where I'm frustrated. And there's things, but at the end of the day, facing top 25 teams was not expected to win. So regardless of where your expectations might be now, if your expectations were for Baylor not be a top 25 team, those games would have been challenging to win. Now Baylor gets into the portion of their schedule. Texas Tech is probably the next closest thing to a top 25 team. They face them in next week. And that's their 7th game of the season. And from there's no teams that are kind of knocking on that door of top 25 teams. So I just, I'm disappointed in how the season's gone. I think because of the reasons that were outside of who's been played. It's how games have finished, losing on a Hail Mary to Colorado, the BYU outcome. We've talked about it all plenty. But now I think that if they want to get to a bowl game, the games that they needed to win are in the back half of their schedule. And I keep on repeating it. And there's no other way to say it other than I'm disappointed. at 2-4, but I think there's a path. And if there's not, then we could be more frustrated in this season than we are right now.
And I would say also that, and we mentioned this on the last show, but I think it's important to remember, I think right now a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, but what does it mean to beat up on bad teams? And okay, like I can see maybe what you're talking about there, but I would also say that you're getting to play the teams that I actually think matter the most when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to prestige of your program, when it comes to alumni being excited about wins. Sure, the alumni would have been excited about beating Colorado just because of, Colorado getting a lot of national attention. But does that matter more than beating TCU at home or going on the road and beating Texas Tech or beating Oklahoma State at home? I don't think so. I think these next 3 games matter far more than the games that have been played up to this point. If Baylor finds a way to go 2-1 during that stretch, I do think people will see there will be something to be excited about. Yeah. Let's just put it like that. And we'll see if they can do that, because they haven't really proven they can do that, especially the home struggles that we've seen over the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I just, for myself personally, and I'm speaking myself in a lot of this, you reset expectations. Okay, where did we begin this season? What were the goals for the season? And we all agree it was never a top 25 team. It was, let's get back to postseason. And now for the back half of the schedule, you have an opportunity to do that. And that's what we're talking about today. And it's, how does Baylor overcome a 2-4 start, win 4 of their last 6 games? Something they haven't won 4 of 6 games since the beginning of the 22 season. So it's not an easy feat for this team, for Dave Aranda's team. But if it's going to happen, we each kind of listed out our top 3 reasons. We don't really know. I think I told you one of them before we got on here, but for me, what are those for you? What is number 1? And we'll just go back and forth and explain our reasoning on how Baylor gets back to the postseason.
Yeah. So my number 1 reason, and this is one where, you put a lot on the head coach, and you really say, okay, this is winning time. You got to find a way to win games. You got to find things to turn around a season. So my kind of just thought is, what if Dave Aranda has a really good bye week? What if Baylor's defense gets a lot healthier with Carl Williams, Cooper Lands, Garmin Randolph, Caden Jenkins? What if Aranda is able to scheme up new things during the bye week? As we know, he's a defensive mastermind, or at least he has been throughout his entire career. And what if he's able to get that unit to perform at a very high level the second half of the season against a bunch of teams who, while yes, they're very good finesse-wise, I don't see a lot of these power smash mouth football teams outside of maybe Tech from time to time with Taj Brooks, and West Virginia with their running backs and their offensive line. But I don't view it as the same level as the teams they've played so far, especially schematically. It's just a different way of attacking you. So I'm curious if Aranda can really get these guys to play at a high level and play with a physicality that maybe these other programs haven't gotten used to during the first half of the season. And we'll see, but it's a bet on Aranda, right? It's a bet on him to turn this defense around, get guys healthy, make the adjustments, and then have them ready for the second half of the season, including, right off the bat on the road in Lubbock.
Yeah. So I want to make sure this is clear. We did not talk about these beforehand. I mentioned one of mine, and it'll probably be overlap with yours a little bit, but one of mine was very similar, and it's 100% facing more spread offenses. And like Colorado was a spread offense, and I think we could all say that what Baylor did for basically 60 minutes, removing the Hail Mary in the overtime against Colorado and Shedeur Sanders in Boulder, was pretty impressive. And not that they held them to 10 points, not that they held them to 7 points like Nebraska did, but what they did in sacking him 8 times and playing more true coverage against spread offenses. Now, Colorado doesn't run the ball really well, but we'll find in the second half of the season that there's some teams like Oklahoma State right now, and specifically Oklahoma. TCU. Sorry, my mind was going crazy there because I'm looking at the rankings they have right now for rushing attempts, and TCU's down there. But there's teams like that don't run the ball. They match up more similarly with what Baylor did against Colorado. And I think that kind of gives me some hope. And I'll look at particularly the way that these offenses are aligned. You mentioned it already. They want to run the football. West Virginia wants to run the football, but they're running it in different ways than Iowa State, Utah, and specifically BYU. They're going to spread you out more, and they want to get you in space and run all over you. Now, that doesn't mean West Virginia is not physical, right? That doesn't mean that Kansas particularly is not physical. They just do it in a different way in a lot of ways. And Kansas is the one that's kind of the outlier. And even Houston, to an extent, Houston's just not as potent as some of these other offenses potentially. They're going to be physical. And I think Baylor potentially matches up better schematically with those teams, kind of like what you're saying. I think that Dave Aranda is more in his wheelhouse when facing these spread offenses and being able to shut them down a little bit more. I mean, the game plan against Colorado was executed for the most part the entire game, outside of the Hail Mary and then the long play before the second half. Shedeur Sanders doesn't turn the football over. They sacked him. They pressured him. I'm anxious to see how that plays out in the second half of the season.
I agree. And I think the other part that we're kind of saying without saying it is that they're going to face a lot more teams that I feel like are potentially more one-dimensional, especially like Kansas, not a great throwing the football team, especially with the turnovers. Houston basically can only run the football at this point in the season. TCU can only throw it. Oklahoma State can only throw it. Tech and West Virginia are the two really, big time challenges when it comes to being really good at both. And so that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But again, if you can win one of those, sneak out one of those, just have a really good performance, that changes kind of your outlook on getting to 4 wins.
Yeah, so you look at it, West Virginia is number 3 in rushing attempts per game in the Big 12 currently, Kansas number 5, Houston 8, and then you have, I would really actually found this intriguing. I know Tech wants to run the ball with Taj Brooks quite a bit, but they actually ranked 12th in carries per game in the Big 12. I thought the number would be higher before I looked at it. Then you have TCU at 13, Oklahoma State at 14, whereas, you're talking about Iowa State, very balanced, don't run a ton of plays, but all of those teams are different, but like you mentioned, they can kind of be one-dimensional at times.
And Colt, one thing on Texas Tech, they didn't have Taj Brooks for 2 games, and so I think that skews their numbers a little bit. When they've had him, they've been giving him the football and being more diverse, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt. He's arguably the best running back in the league. Returned from a massive year last year. Baylor faced him in 2 weeks. But overall, we talked about it some last year with Baylor the last couple of years with Baylor under Jeff Grimes being a outside or wide zone scheme and what they did and how they match up well with physical teams. Now they're back to the spread on the offensive side of the ball. What they see in every single day in practice is a little bit different, the looks they're getting. And so maybe the mentality has just shifted a little bit quicker than we could have possibly anticipated. But yeah, I'm with you. I think being able to face teams that more match up with what Baylor wants to do defensively than what Utah, BYU presented to them, and obviously Iowa State. So with that, I'll go into kind of my second point because those mesh really well, and they're facing teams at this juncture who are more turnover prone. Iowa State this is for the entire season ranked first in turnovers lost with 4. Colorado's number 3 with 5. BYU's number 4 with 6, and then you have Utah at 8. Utah's a little that number's low for them. I think with Cam Rising, that number's not as high. Baylor saw him for a half, where other Big 12 teams have not seen him at all. Anticipating him getting back pretty soon, but then you look at the back half of the schedule. Every single team that they will face in their last 6 games are are 7th or below, with Oklahoma State, Houston, Kansas, and TCU all being in the bottom 12 of the league and giving up the football. For a Baylor team that hasn't taken the ball away a ton, they've done it moderately so. Like they have turnovers in games. Like you saw the one against Iowa State, the interception right before the half. BYU, that had a couple of interceptions. But overall, they just haven't taken the ball away a ton. But they also haven't been given a ton of opportunities. That's a potential swing for these games in Baylor's favor, that you played teams that protected the ball really well. And now in the second half of the season, you face some teams that have given it up. I mean, specifically looking at Kansas and TCU at 15 and 16 in the league. I mean, both in the passing game specifically give up the ball a lot. And obviously turnovers always a major point of emphasis for any defense.
Something's got to give, right, in those matchups. And unfortunately, you can't sit there. Like, I can't sit here and say, oh, Baylor's definitely going to take the ball away, because they just haven't done it. And unfortunately, when you kind of come into a season, you kind of learn whether you're a team that's good at forcing turnovers or not within the first 4 or 5 games, typically. And so this hasn't been a team that has done that. Now, on the flip side, TCU and Kansas have proven they're plenty capable of giving you opportunities to create those turnovers. So the question is, does Baylor take advantage of those, which they haven't so far this year? And then how many more chances do teams like TCU and Kansas give you? I'd also say, I think a couple of these other teams will take more risks. I mean, we've seen Baron Morton turn the ball over a lot during his career. We've seen Alan Bowman take risks as well, throwing the football. So again, it just totally different than the first half of the season where all those teams prided themselves on taking care of the football. And then Shedeur Sanders just amazingly, as many times as he gets sacked, he's just really good at not turning the ball over. He's been really, really good at that. And so that definitely could change Baylor's turnover luck. And as we know, turnovers can completely flip games. I mean, we've seen it for years now. If you win a turnover margin 3-0, I don't care who you're playing. You're going to have a great shot to win. I think Vanderbilt kind of proved that against Alabama this weekend.
Yeah, so on the season, Baylor's -3 in turnover margin. What I will say is you take away that Colorado game where they don't turn the ball over. I mean, at the rate that they throw the football, they don't turn it over a lot. But you talk about the Air Force game, you talk about the BYU game and the Iowa State game specifically. 3 games. In those games, they forced 6 turnovers. That's a pretty high rate, but I think they've had more opportunities to get them. If you look specifically, I would say in the Colorado game, there were some throws that they potentially could have intercepted in the secondary. They didn't get to them. Fumbles on the ground, they didn't get to those. There was one to Shedeur Sanders that he fumbled on a sack, didn't get on the ball. It's about capitalizing on those opportunities. Against BYU, I felt in the second half, twice they had bad throws by the quarterback. Twice they made interceptions. You talk about the one for Corey Gordon and Elias Noel on the tip pass. But I'm really anxious. Does TCU continue to put the ball in harm's way when throwing the football? Jalen Daniels at Kansas just completely, I don't know, fell off a cliff in terms of turnovers in that passing game. And then Oklahoma State ranked number 12. I'm not relying on Texas Tech and West Virginia to give up the ball a ton because they're going to run it more. But these teams that want to throw it a lot, that are going to have to throw it a little bit more, they're just going to have a lot more opportunities to get them. And Baylor has to capitalize on them if they want to have a chance in these games.
Absolutely. That's going to be an area that they absolutely need to correct and capitalize on this second half of the year. And they need to take care of the ball too. I mean, that's kind of the other part of this. You can't throw a bunch of interceptions or fumble the football and hope to win. You got to be able to just limit yours and then take away from other teams. And I think that is a big storyline. It kind of, I guess, leads me into my next one. So kind of the way that I'm kind of looking at this is probably a little bit of faulty logic, because a lot of times trends over the first half of the year continue in the second half of the year. But I do think it's important to mention Baylor has lost 2 games this year that came down to a play or a score or something fluky, or whatever you want to call it. 7-point loss to Colorado, 6-point loss to BYU. Those games were even closer than the scores show, and Baylor definitely should have won the Colorado game. Just you play it out 100 times, maybe that happens twice for Colorado. So it just was one of those unlucky circumstances that Baylor didn't take advantage of. So now in the second half of the season, are they able to turn around this close game luck? They're going to have to. They're going to have to win close games. They haven't proven that they can do that for the most part in the last 2.5 years at all, really. Right. So it's hard to have a lot of faith in that. But these point spreads for these games coming up are going to be, I think most of them, outside maybe the Tech game, since it's on the road in Lubbock, maybe that'll be more like a 7-point spread, maybe. But I think a lot of these games are going to be within 3 points. Probably the spread. And so how are you able to capitalize when given opportunities? Because if they don't capitalize on winning close games, there's no way they're making a bowl game. No chance. Because I think they're going to have to win multiple of these games by a touchdown or a field goal. Probably at least 2 of them, I would think. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at when I'm looking at this schedule. You're going to have great opportunities for low point spreads. You're going to have an opportunity to play teams that have been completely inconsistent, just like you. And so when you're given a chance in a toss-up game, can you actually go and take that game? And I think that's kind of a key thing that I'm looking at in the second half of the year. And really, if they want to make a bowl game, That probably is what it's going to come down to ultimately, just as a kind of general overview type thing.
Yeah. So K Ford, who we kind of referred to, Kelly Ford rankings, he recently put out, of all the teams in the country, how many projected one possession games do they have remaining? Baylor has 6 games left on their schedule. 5 of those are projected to be one-score games. I assume that the outlier there is the Texas Tech game being on the road, maybe like a 7.5-point game, or an 8.5-point game, which is not a one possession game because it's a touchdown and a little bit more. Maybe it's close like that, or maybe it's a 10-point game. I don't know exactly where that is, but 5 of those, that means that worst case scenario, you have to win 4 of those 5. And that's going to be extremely difficult. This isn't winning 50% of those. You got to win 4 or 5 of those, or 4 or 6 of the games you have left on your schedule. And that's not something Baylor's done. I mean, you look at it, the Iowa State game obviously wasn't a one possession game. BYU, Colorado, Utah game was, I mean, not close, but they had a chance to make it closer later in the game. Dating back to last year, West Virginia game, one possession game, and they just haven't done it. So you expect that one possession game luck to shift a little bit. I mean, you go back to even to the Houston game last year, the one that went to overtime. Houston wins on a 2-point conversion in Waco. That luck, a lot of these times it comes down to luck. And I'm not saying that Baylor has to have luck in these games, but they absolutely have to have luck. Like, it's just part of it. It's a fumbling at an inopportune time. It's missing a field goal that would have put you up 9 when you're only up 6, right? Like, there's just so many of these little components that have to happen for you to win one possession games. You hope Baylor's luck shifts, or they're not going to make the postseason.
Right. That's pretty much it. And some of it is luck. I would also say some of it is, bad decisions or good decisions. I mean, that Houston game specifically, if I remember correctly, Baylor had a chance to go for 2 in regulation and chose not to. And then Houston goes for 2 and they win the game. Like, that's a decision. Like, that is a decision. That is going out and winning a football game. And so those things do have to be mentioned as well, because yes, there is luck involved, but also it's like, you got to make a play. You got to make a play call. You got to make, like, these things late in games, when the games get so close, it can come down to one decision of doing something or not doing it. And so, it all kind of comes back together. But in general, I look at the schedule and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I think Baylor could beat Houston by more than a score, potentially. Maybe Kansas has just completely given up and Baylor finds a way. But so far this year, Kansas has proven they're going to be in one-score games the whole year. They've just kind of, just like Baylor, proven they're just not going to win those games up to this point in the season. And then you look at the other ones, you get TCU and Oklahoma State in McLean. There's no reason that those games should be blowouts. No, like close. Zero reason. And so that's kind of what it all comes down to. There's 4 games for you right there. And then again, Texas Tech, West Virginia, I think those are the 2 outliers, the 2 games that I think are going to be the toughest to win. But if you can find a way, again, to make those games close, which both those teams have either lost at home or played really close games at home. Texas Tech against Cincinnati and Abilene Christian. West Virginia, of course, lost to Penn State at home. I think had a close one against Kansas at home as well. Other teams have gone in there and competed. And so can you go in there and compete, make the game close, and then again, find a way to win it? We'll see, but it's going to be a really important storyline the second half of the year.
Yeah, so you got Texas Tech, who's 4-0 in one-possession games. They beat Cincinnati in one-possession game, Abilene Christian in overtime, Arizona State in a one-possession game, and then the fourth one escapes me right now. Arizona one-possession game. Yeah, so that all of their wins have been one-possession games. Then you look at a team like Kansas, who you finish off the season with, all of their losses have been one-possession games. Yeah, and it truly is a matter of going and making plays. We talked about turnovers. If you're turning over the ball, Kansas, sorry, like, you turn over the ball a lot, you probably didn't deserve to win those games. Texas Tech, on the other hand, is kind of middle of the pack, and they figured out how to win close games. And they're 5-1 because of it, 3-0 in the Big 12, and kind of fringe top 25. You kind of wonder, their resume does not say top 25, but at some point you got to justify saying, okay, if they go 6-1, 7-1, they got to be in the top 25 at some point because they're winning games. But yeah, you got to win close games, and that's the name of the game in the Big 12 every single week. I mean, that's truly a marketing thing for the Big 12. Is like, every single week they're going to be games. 50% of our games are one-possession games, and the entertainment value is extremely high. So yeah, I'm with you. Got to win turnover or close games. Begins with turnover battles, everything else, and that leads me into Baylor's quarterback play. This is my final key. And man, Sawyer, like, he just battles, like, and it's not like you can talk about, playing quote hero ball or just being a gunslinger or whatever you want to talk about. But he's now in 5 straight starts where he's had a QBR over 75, and 4 of those are like pushing 90, right? I think 85 and then an 88, a couple 88s and a 90. He is sitting really well in this Jake Spavital passing offense. Like, there's the balance of making plays, but also running the scheme, and he's doing it without a running game. Like he is his running game right now. And you start talking about one possession games and needed quarterbacks to go make plays. Say the Iowa State game goes into the fourth quarter in a one possession game. I have a lot of confidence in Sawyer Robertson figuring out how to make a play. He's going to be a guy who makes a play from the quarterback position. And you go into this last stretch of the season against defenses that are not as tough as what you face, at least on paper, statistically right now. There's no one that's even close to what Baylor has faced. Maybe Houston would be the closest thing overall. And I really like Sawyer Robertson to help them make plays. And they need that offensively because they don't have a running game right now. It means dodging sacks. It means getting first down with your feet. It means there's going to be opportunities to turn the football over where you just got to go make a play. Don't turn it over, make a play. But man, like, in his last 2 games against top 25 K4 defenses, BYU and Iowa State, some for 582 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. 2 of the interceptions I don't really credit to him. The 2 against BYU, the tip ball, and then forcing one down the field late to try to make a play and win that game. I mean, he goes to him, but I just don't give it to him for a lot of reasons. And then 15 carries, 53 yards, 1 touchdown. He's been a gamer. And if Baylor wants to win this you bring in Jake Spavital with his offense, he's a quarterback guy. This is an opportunity to do it. This isn't the wide zone scheme. Let your quarterback go and make plays. That they've done it. You want, in a lot of ways, just kind of ride him as much as you can. Don't get him hurt, but I like him if there's a lot of close games in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the reason for that. And this kind of went in line with what I was going to kind of talk about as well. But Sawyer's been very good. And I think there are things just when you watch him play and watch him function in this offense, he seems very comfortable, very at home with it. I've mentioned this for a couple weeks now. It feels like there's a new receiver who's leading this team in receiving every single week, which kind of is it kind of is a staple of the air raid offense that, a lot of different guys, attack matchups and you're able to take advantage of those. But I think it also speaks to Sawyer's just relationship with all of these wide receivers. He's really just finding the open man and finding, the guy that the play is supposed to go to. And I think that's really important and something that he's really gotten a great grasp of. I'll also say, I listen to, multiple podcasts, and I know Travis does one, the TD pod, and he brought up something like week 1 of the season. And it kind of makes sense as this season has unfolded a little bit, because we talked a little bit about early in the year, the whole offense hasn't been shown yet. And, what exactly does that mean? I think up to this point in the season, the run game basically is what the run game is. Like, I don't see much changes coming. They seem very set on what they want to do in that regard. But I do think in the passing game, I think there's a little bit of an install that might take place over this bye week.
Yeah.
That maybe even takes this offense to another level, allows them to function even more, maybe create some short throws that allow you to have, extensions of the run game a little bit, since they're not running the football well. And so I think that's going to be really important as well. This next 2-week period, that gives Sawyer a lot of reps and learning a lot of new concepts, gives the receivers a chance to continue building that relationship and that rapport with Sawyer as well. So I think that's really important, going forward off of this bye week, is that there could be things we haven't seen yet. I mean, this is still the first year of Jake Spavital at Baylor, And I think this passing game still has another step to take schematically. And so therefore, I think it could mean that Sawyer maybe has another step to take as well as he gets more comfortable, gets put into better situations. And then kind of speaking to the schedule, well, Oklahoma State and Texas Tech are at the bottom of the league in passing yards allowed per game.
Yeah.
The two of them have been abysmal in pass coverage. Tech is giving up 308 passing yards per game. Yes, I know they gave up 500 to Abilene Christian, and maybe someone has an excuse for that, but it still is really, really bad. And then you look at Oklahoma State, 258.5 yards per game through the air. So those two clearly the weakest of the bunch. West Virginia is down inside the bottom 6 as well. But then you also look, TCU pretty good against the pass, Houston pretty good against the pass, and then Kansas is kind of sitting in the middle. So good opportunities, I would say, for Sawyer to have some big games, but also some challenging ones in there, in which they're going to have to really dial it up from a play calling standpoint, and potentially from a run the ball type standpoint. And maybe that is also put on Sawyer's plate as well, as we've kind of seen through the season. His legs have been very valuable to Baylor's, giving Baylor chances to move the football at least.
Yeah, so I think it's important to remind everyone that Sawyer was not the starter at the beginning of the year. Majority, I would say over 75, probably closer to 90% of first team snaps were DeQuan Finn snaps. And then you start talking about just from week to week installs of being able to your game planning for teams. So your Baylor might have 75 plays installed with Jake Spavital's offense from the offseason, but then some of those plays are never used in a particular game because of the defensive scheme. So you get into a game against Tech and you have, say, a defense that you haven't seen. They're going to show you different things, and you might see a whole barrage of plays that you haven't seen the entire season because of what Tech does specifically. It's not that they weren't there, but now for 2 weeks, Sawyer gets to rep them. So I'm anxious to see. I'm with you. I'm anxious to see how that goes. I think Sawyer's only going to get better in this offense. You wish he had a run game to get going. What I will say too, like Baylor really kind of got away from the run after the Colorado game. BYU, Iowa State, they didn't run it a ton. Obviously, Bryson Washington gets hurt in the Iowa State game. Looked like a concussion. You hope he's back. But as these defenses lighten up a little bit in terms of rush defense, Tech is actually a pretty good rush defense. Passing defense is not. Oklahoma State's not a good rush defense. That you can kind of go down the list. TCU, I think, is a bottom third of the Big 12 as well. So I'm curious what Baylor does in the run game and those game planning wise, because I think we've kind of just seen Iowa State, we're not going to run the ball. BYU, we're not going to run the ball. We want to throw the ball. So what do those teams who present less of a challenge in the run, what does Baylor do with Jake Spavital in that offense? If it's QB run or if he's true traditional, spread attack run. I'm anxious to see what happens and how much that will help Sawyer.
So I think just kind of going off of that stat, none of the teams that Baylor faces going forward are in the top 5 in the Big 12 in run defense currently at this point in the season. BYU and Utah are both inside the top 5, so Baylor's had to play them. TCU, Oklahoma State, Kansas are all inside the bottom 5, and then Tech is at the bottom 7, very similar to Colorado currently in run defense. Colorado's in the bottom 6 of the league as well. So lots of chances to run the ball. It's hard to have a lot of faith in it because of the way it has gone so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the goal in running in those games is to avoid being one-dimensional. Mm-hmm. If you can run and not like they did it decently against Iowa State early. I think the yards per carry for the game was like 4. I don't know exactly where it ended up, but like they weren't going to run the ball. It was kind of like, we're going to run it just to keep you a little bit honest, but they didn't do it a ton. Sawyer had a couple runs in there, didn't get sacked, which was great. Didn't hurt that average, but it's there's a lot of things that Baylor's going to have to do right in the second half of the season to win games, things that we discuss now and things that we don't foresee in what's going to happen with them. So I'm anxious to see how it plays out. But Grayson, any final thoughts before we wrap this episode up?
No, it's
into the rest of the bye week.
No, it's just going to be a really interesting upcoming season. And I know next week, excited to talk about Texas Tech and preview kind of what that matchup is going to be like as Baylor looks to turn around what has been a really challenging start to the season.
All right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. As always, thanks to each of you for listening. For Grayson Grudenhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Thursday and Sick 'em Bears.